Hi everyone, my name is Jack Anderson. I'm a senior analyst within the National Disease Registration Service at NHS England, and I'm going to be talking through some work we did to transform the reporting of national patient outcomes with SHINY. So that is the 30-day mortality post-systemic anti-cancer therapy report. So as a bit of background, the SACT dataset, or systemic anti-cancer therapy, is a mandatory data collection for all NHS trusts in England who deliver SACT, and that is collected by the National Disease Registration Service. There's a QR code there if you want to know more about NDRS. So what is SACT? This refers to drugs used to treat cancer, and that includes chemotherapy, immunotherapy, targeted therapy, and hormonal therapy. And then for those people wondering what case mix adjusted rates means, these are rates that are calculated via logistic regression, which is a modeling technique that uses the real world data to adjust for patient and treatment factors and therefore estimate the probability of death within 30 days following SACT for each patient. So basically our rates are based on an average group of patients. And why would we do this? This is primarily to enable comparison between trusts and within trusts over time. It's to better support clinical governance and to help clinicians better understand their patient outcomes. So to firstly cover where we started when we set this work up, the very first CMAR release was a dreaded Excel workbook. So this contained lots of tabs repeated largely by cancer type with funnel plots and data tables and a bit of methodological information. However, we also had a supportive toolkit PDF, which was sort of FAQs, and then also a companion brief, which contained key messages and other supportive information. And this was all emailed to every trust, so to over 125 trusts as separate attachments. To dig into the workbook a little bit, in its old format, the primary visualization is a funnel plot. So just to explain that here, the dots are NHS trusts, our horizontal line is the England average, our dashed lines are our standard deviation limits, and along the x-axis, we've got the number of patients treated, and up the y, we've got our case mix adjusted rates. So the old version was somewhat customizable. So you can see the drop down there, and that would update our little summary table, and then our dots for the trust would highlight in yellow, which I've circled there. However, this didn't have any reactive labeling, so if you took the plot out of the workbook, the yellow dot was sort of meaningless. You needed to repeat this across every tab, and it's also near impossible to identify a trust unless you actively filter and highlight them, so you couldn't really explore this live. And then the data tables tab, just to touch on that, the main thing to flag is that, so the table is just a tabular version of the funnel plot. But beneath that, after a good amount of scrolling, we also had supplementary tables. So these were being missed quite easily if you didn't know to look for them. So just to recap the disadvantages, it's very administratively time consuming, emailing it to all of those trusts, limited capacity for QA, debugging and version control in Excel. Each release was emailed out as a standalone thing, and our user interface wasn't very intuitive and it was quite repetitive. So that paints quite a bleak picture, but I'll now move to where we are now thanks to SHINY implementation. So the first thing I wanted to touch on was the improvements that we've been able to make to our whole production and development process. So we've now implemented GitHub version control for the entire output. And of course, we have implemented R and R SHINY, so using the open source code has made it much more intuitive and easy to produce a new CMAR, but also we now have one automated script to compile a new CMAR in with all of the others. And with R, we've also implemented a functionalized workflow, so everything is much easier to debug and it runs a lot more efficiently. And then just to cover as well the CMAR release methods, So I've mentioned that it was emailed out to all of the trusts, but this was actually done in 2 phases. So phase 1 was the trust release, where we email out those 3 attachments separately to each trust in England. So that's over 375 email attachments, and trusts had 4 weeks to review those, and then they could submit a supportive statement. And then in phase 2, we would make the results publicly available alongside any of those statements. However, with Shiny, CMAR is now shared via a restricted access web page in that phase 1, and we just attach 1 quick read attachment, so approximately a third of the previous admin. And the way we do that is with the shinyapps.io backend. So we monitor, we change the application visibility from public to private. And what that does on the front end is hide it behind the authorization required and a login requirement, which we can then maintain through our invite user button. So then we can track who is accessing the app during this phase 1 period, and also prompt people whose invites have expired. And then our public release is that much easier again, so we can just swap that back from private to public. So much easier than it was previously. So that leads us to the app itself, which I've dubbed the one-stop SACT CMAR shop. And this is a screenshot of the app itself. So hopefully you can immediately notice some improvements compared to the workbook, but I'll go through those now. So the first thing to note is that we made an effort to maximize the amount of data that we provide. So we've upgraded our tab set structure to no longer be repetitive by cancer type, and now it's split by area of analysis with subtabs for the visualization itself. So we're trying to, with this, make it as intuitive as possible, and also minimize the amount of scrolling so we're not risking things being missed. And then just to touch on our sidebar, we did a lot of work to optimize this with input pickers and download buttons in order to support the one-stop shop. So users can customize the app based on report of interest, which dictates cancer type and treatment years, as well as NHS Trust and Cancer Alliance. And then we have the download buttons for the guidance and underlying data to ensure that everything is all in one place. And it wouldn't be a Shiny conference if I didn't put a bit of Shiny code in the slides. So just to note that our server has been tailored so that selections made using the sidebar input pickers for our primary report are reactive across tabs, so that users aren't having to go between each tab and make the same selections again and again. So we've just got our observe event logic, which is looking for an input to the overall tab report picker as an example, and sending an update to that on our gender tab, for example, and setting the selection to match the overall tab. So hopefully this makes the user's experience a lot easier. And just to delve into that report picker a little more, because this is really pivotal to our one-stop shop. So changing this selection allows users to switch between releases and view all of the data and guidance in one place. So with this, we've been able to have reactive download buttons. So the selection made on the input picker feeds into our guidance and data downloads, and it provides release-specific HTML guidance and CSV data downloads based on the user's interests. And then also, it of course updates the app itself, so the funnel plots and data tables, which I'll come to, but also the labeling, which I mentioned previously we didn't have. So I've just put an example on the slide here of what that looks like in our server. You can quite simply render some text that pastes together our input picker with text of our choice. And then in our user interface, we can just call that as a text output, which will display reactively, which is very handy. And just to move on to improvements made to the plotting, these are now much more interactive thanks to Shiny. So this is the plot again, but the new version just a bit closer up. To repeat, the NHS trusts are the dots, and then we've got our England average and our standard deviation funnel lines. And you'll notice that we now have two plots, and that's largely driven by how easy and intuitive it is to display data with Shiny. So we've now opted to supplement all of our case mix adjusted plots with unadjusted crude counterparts. And of course, doing all of this in Shiny, we've built these plots with ggplot and plotly, which come with their own perks, which I'm sure you're all aware of. But now we can have live exploration of the data. So we've got hover functionality for additional information on the data points and the average. You can also remove plot features to create a much more focused plot if you didn't want any of the background noise. And then built-in functions such as downloads and displaying multiple hover information boxes and so on. So just to continue on the plots, users can make use of our provider level input pickers to customize these even further. So we have input pickers for the NHS Trust and also for the Cancer Alliance. So basically you can select a trust. So in this instance, I've chosen Lewisham and Greenwich, and that will highlight our plot in orange and also update our legend so that if this is lifted out, it's still clear what everything relates to. And then by default, our Cancer Alliance picker will update to show the relevant Cancer Alliance for that trust. So then our dark blue dots are the other trusts within that same Cancer Alliance, just to support comparison of mortality rates across trusts in your Cancer Alliance. So that will happen by default, but a user can override this if they wish to. So say that Lewisham and Greenwich wanted to look at their neighbouring Cancer Alliance, then they can swap to, in this case, North East London, and then view the trusts in North East London in dark blue. And then combining this with then that functionality to hover and also to remove. So if you wanted to remove all of the background light blue points, then you could. So you can start to create much more bespoke visualizations than was possible in our old workbook. And just to touch on how we've optimized these in Shiny, the first example is integrating these within our functions. So this is just a snippet from our funnel plot function to highlight that we have opted to parameterize all of our input pickers from the app. And so trust name, Cancer Alliance, and report itself. And the first of these is used in the simple plot filtering, plot data filtering. And this is essential for allowing all of our CMAR reports to be in one place. And then the second come for those layers for the orange and the dark blue plot layers. So our Trust and Cancer Alliance inputs are used to filter the data that feed into the geom point layers for the funnel plot itself. And then the other example is the interactivity of the input pickers. So I've already touched on how the input pickers are reactive between tabs, but they're also reactive within each tab to try and minimize confusion for the user. So an example is our CMAR report. Making a selection there will update your trust of interest drop-down options so that we're only seeing the relevant trusts. So there's no confusion around if a trust sees themselves and they don't even treat a particular cancer type, for example. And I've just added another server code example, but it's the same logic of observing for events, updating the picker input, but this time, rather than changing the selection, we're changing the choices. Just to touch on our data tables, so the funnel plots still have those data table counterparts, but we've opted to add these now at all geographical levels. So again, this is underpinned by parameterizing, in this case, the geography and the CMAR report. And what this does is enable us to code just one function. So we have one table creation, which will create the table for the CMAR report of interest. And then we can use our inputs in a simple if-else at the end of that, so that then from one function, we're creating tables at different geographies which are used on different tabs. So what that looks like in our front end is a trust level tab, which is just the data for the selected trust, or then a Cancer Alliance level, which will summarise all of the trust's results in the selected Cancer Alliance. And then if users aren't too bothered about looking regionally, then they can go to the All Trusts tab to view everything together. So I've covered a lot of the upgrades that we've made, but I just wanted to cover some shiny and new offerings that we've been able to make. So the first, and probably most significant of those, is we've now implemented stratifications. So as well as viewing their results overall, trusts, wherever numbers allow, trusts can view their mortality rates broken down by gender, age group, deprivation, ethnic group, and intent of treatment. And of course, these all come with their own input pickers so that users can toggle between subgroups. And then our trust table, if they want to view all subgroups together for a particular trust, then they can do so. Or if they want to compare all trusts in their Cancer Alliance for each group, then they can also do that. And then just to touch on what we've done with those data tables that you used to have to scroll for and you would probably miss. These are now their own tabs with their own CSVs underpinning them. So the first of those is a summary tab. So this is going to highlight key messages such as national averages and trust inclusions. And it's filtered on report. But you'll notice there's also a trust of interest option there. So users can also filter for their trust, and what they can see is a trust level table that will show all of the results for that trust across all of the tabs in one place for users that don't have as much time. And then we have our excluded trusts tab, which is also filterable by CMAR report, and it will show which trusts haven't been included and a brief description as to why. And then finally, we also have the trust statements. So these are those statements that come out of the phase 1 release, which previously weren't very intuitively linked to a report, but now they are in plain sight and can be filtered on CMAR report again. So expanding both by stratification and to add the tabs in this way, I think is something that was only sort of easy to conceive in Shiny, because it's really intuitive to expand that user interface without it becoming overwhelming or thinking, if I add one more thing in, is anyone even going to look at it? So that completes the tour of the Shiny app. I just wanted to touch on something that we've added now that we've implemented Shiny, which is Google Analytics. I've noticed in a few talks there might be more ways that we can look at what users are doing, but as in the first instance, we've implemented Google Analytics. It's just one line in terms of your user interface, and then saving the relevant file in the folder structure. And what that means we can do is track our app views. So we've started doing this, and as an example, this is the CMAR app views over time, and you can quite nicely see our phase 1 and phase 2 releases as we would expect. So just to recap the Shiny revolution that SACT CMAR has undergone, Shiny has enabled smoother national releases with our GitHub and shinyapps.io. We now have all you need all in one place. We have optimized input pickers, which have changed the user's game. We have functionalized code, Plotly, and DT implementation. And we have expanded the reporting suite and revolutionized the user interface. And then very finally, we've upgraded our user statistics via Google Analytics. And then as my final talking point, I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out the rest of NDRS, because we have taken up Shiny quite widely, as Natalia covered earlier as well. So much so that we now have an internal Shiny template developed by colleagues of mine, which helps promote uniformity in our apps. It offers best practice tips in terms of structuring, naming, and branching. And it comes with out-of-the-box wins in terms of your app structure, your logos, and your color schemes, as well as the Google Analytics already implemented. And you can see all of the apps that NDRS produce on the Cancer Data Hub. So there is a QR code up the top there, so covering epidemiology through to treatment, through to living with cancer. And then the CMAR app that I've covered today is the lower QR code. But yeah, thank you, and any questions?